Callista Moore agreed to a blind date expecting another broke dreamer with empty pockets. The man waiting wore scuffed sneakers, a thrift store jacket, and carried a sketchbook instead of a watch. She almost walked away until he asked which skyline made her feel safe. Hours later, that question would shatter everything, because Liam Carter, the poor stranger who listened like an architect of hearts, wasn't struggling. Quietly, he owned half the city she designed for, and he had chosen her for something bigger all along. The early autumn rain painted abstract patterns on the windows of Beacon and Bean, a small coffee shop tucked between towering glass monuments to corporate ambition. Callista Moore sat at a corner table, her architectural portfolio closed beside an untouched latte, watching the door with the resignation of someone who had agreed to this blind date, purely to stop her best friend Amanda from pestering her about finding balance in life. 28 years old, with talent that should have opened every door in the city, Callista had just faced her third rejection this month. The Green Courtyard housing project, her vision of affordable homes wrapped in community gardens and safe playgrounds, had been dismissed by yet another developer board as insufficiently appealing to the ultra-wealthy demographic. The bell above the door chimed, and a man entered wearing clothes that immediately told Callista everything she thought she needed to know. Scuffed sneakers that had seen too many miles, a jacket that clearly came from a thrift store rack, faded jeans that spoke of function over fashion. He carried a worn leather sketchbook instead of a briefcase, and when he checked the time, it was on a basic phone, not the luxury watches she had grown accustomed to seeing on the wrists of men in her professional circle. This was Liam Carter, 33 years old, with eyes that noticed everything and revealed nothing, moving through the expensive coffee shop like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Amanda had been deliberately vague about this setup, mentioning only that Liam was someone who understood cities and might share Callista's passion for meaningful design. Now, watching him approach with a slight smile that seemed more observant than charming, Callista mentally prepared her exit strategy. She would be polite for exactly one coffee, make appropriate small talk about the weather and generic interests, then claim an early morning meeting. The dating pool in this city seemed to offer only two options: wealthy developers who saw her as a trophy addition to their portfolio, or dreamers with beautiful ideas and empty bank accounts who would eventually expect her to fund their artistic ambitions. But Liam Carter didn't follow the script she had written in her mind. Instead of launching into a rehearsed introduction or trying to impress her with exaggerated accomplishments, he simply sat down, looked out at the rain-washed skyline visible through the fogged window, and asked a question that made her forget her prepared excuses. Which skyline makes you feel safe? He wanted to know. The one you wake up to, or the one you design in your dreams? The question hung between them like an architectural drawing waiting to be completed, and Callista found herself actually considering her answer instead of deflecting with practiced charm. For the next 2 hours, their conversation wandered through the invisible architecture of human need and urban longing. Liam spoke about cities not as investments or monuments, but as living organisms that either nurtured or neglected their inhabitants. He described the sound of children playing in well-designed public spaces as the truest measure of a neighborhood's success. And when Callista mentioned her Green Courtyard project, he asked about water table management and thermal mass calculations with the precision of someone who understood that beautiful renderings meant nothing if the foundations weren't solid. His phone buzzed once with a message from someone named Henry Donovan, but he glanced at it and immediately turned it face down, giving Callista his complete attention as she explained her vision for modular housing that could adapt to families as they grew. The rain intensified as evening approached, and when they finally prepared to leave, Liam insisted on paying in cash, counting out exact change with bills that looked like they had been carefully saved. Outside, the wind turned sharp with the promise of a cold night ahead, and without hesitation, he shrugged off his worn jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was protective without being possessive, and as Callista walked home wrapped in fabric that smelled faintly of cedar and rain, she told herself that Liam Carter was undoubtedly kind, probably brilliant, and definitely too poor for the complicated realities of her professional world. The next morning arrived with fluorescent clarity, and the familiar anxiety of another presentation that could either launch or bury her career. Carter Sterling Development occupied 42 floors of prime downtown real estate, their headquarters a testament to minimalist power, with its dark glass exterior and security systems that seemed to evaluate visitors' worth before allowing them through the turnstiles. Callista had submitted her green courtyard proposal 6 weeks ago, navigating layers of bureaucracy to finally secure this meeting with the senior development team. The company was legendary for its mysterious owner, someone who rarely appeared at public functions but whose decisions shaped entire neighborhoods. The presentation room overlooked the harbor, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the exact skyline she and Liam had discussed the night before. Vivian Lane, the project director, sat at the head of the conference table with the kind of sharp attention that had earned her a reputation for seeing through inflated promises to find genuine value. Oliver Grant, the chief financial officer, studied spreadsheets with the intensity of someone who believed numbers never lied, while Sarah Preston, an in-house architect whose work Callista had long admired, offered an encouraging nod that suggested solidarity among women navigating a male-dominated field. Callista began her presentation with practiced confidence, walking them through the green courtyard concept with its emphasis on mixed-income accessibility, integrated green spaces that would actually be maintained rather than abandoned, and playground designs that prioritized child safety without sacrificing aesthetic appeal. She presented cost projections that acknowledged reality while demonstrating long-term value, and when Oliver questioned the expense of the sustainable materials she had specified, she had ready answers about life cycle costs and maintenance savings that would offset initial investments. The door opened quietly, and the atmosphere in the room shifted like air pressure before a storm. The man who entered wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored to perfection, but Callista would have recognized those observant eyes anywhere. Liam Carter moved to an empty chair, with the same quiet authority he had shown in the coffee shop. Except now everyone in the room straightened imperceptibly, their attention gravitating toward him like planets acknowledging their Sunday. The worn sketchbook from last night was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a leather portfolio embossed with the initials that suddenly made terrible sense: LCCEO. The presentation continued, but the words felt different in her mouth now, tainted by the realization that last night had been a performance, a test disguised as connection. Liam asked questions about flood mitigation and modular construction techniques that were even more incisive than the night before, each query demonstrating knowledge that no struggling artist with a sketchbook should possess. When he inquired about emergency evacuation routes and whether she had considered partnerships with local schools for the community gardens, Callista answered with professional precision while her mind raced through the implications of this deception. The board promised to review her proposal and provide feedback within 2 weeks. Corporate speak that usually meant rejection, dressed in polite delay. As the meeting concluded, Callista gathered her materials with hands that remained steady through sheer force of will. Walking past the hallway displays of Carter Sterling Development's completed projects, she noticed conceptual sketches that bore an unsettling resemblance to elements of her own design philosophy. Seeds of doubt that would later bloom into understanding were planted in that moment, though she was too angry to recognize them as anything but further evidence of manipulation. The confrontation came that afternoon in Liam's office, a glass sanctuary on the 42nd floor that offered a view of the entire harbor district. The worn jacket from last night hung on a coat hook beside maps showing every development project in the city for the next decade, a jarring juxtaposition that perfectly captured the deception Callista had come to address. The conversation that followed stripped away whatever tentative connection they had built over coffee and rain-soaked philosophy. She accused him of testing her like a lab specimen, of wearing poverty like a costume to evaluate her character, while holding all the power in their dynamic. He responded that he had been 2 different versions of himself, both equally true: the listener who genuinely wanted to understand her vision, and the CEO who needed to evaluate whether that vision could survive market realities. The distinction felt meaningless to Callista, who saw only calculation where she had believed there was genuine interest. When he tried to explain that anonymity was the only way he could have honest conversations without the weight of his position distorting every interaction, she heard only justification for manipulation. Years ago, Another developer had pursued her romantically, gaining her trust over months of late-night conversations about changing the world through design. She had shared her most innovative ideas freely, believing she had found both love and professional partnership. 6 months later, she discovered her concepts had been filed under his name, her innovations becoming his intellectual property through legal mechanisms she had been too trusting to anticipate. That betrayal had taught her to armor her heart and guard her ideas, lessons that Liam's deception had just reinforced with brutal efficiency. She left his office with a promise to herself. No more meetings at Carter Sterling Development. No more presentations to boards that played games with people's dreams. And absolutely no more contact with Liam Carter, regardless of which version of himself he claimed to be. The elevator descended 42 floors, while her resolve hardened into something impermeable, a defensive structure more solid than any building she had ever designed. 2 days passed in professional silence before Henry Donovan made his approach through carefully orchestrated channels. The CEO of Donovan Urban Group had built an empire on luxury towers that maximized profit per square foot, while treating green space as an unfortunate regulatory requirement to be minimized whenever possible. His office occupied the penthouse of a building that cast shadows over 3 neighborhood parks, a detail that wasn't lost on Callista when she arrived for what had been positioned as a revolutionary opportunity to finally build her green courtyard vision. Henry Donovan was 45 years old, with the kind of polished charm that made every conversation feel like a sales pitch for a better version of yourself. He praised her green courtyard design with specific details that proved he had done his homework. And when he offered to fully fund the project with her name prominently featured as lead architect, the proposal seemed almost too good to scrutinize closely. Donovan Urban Group would provide the land, the funding, and the marketing muscle to ensure her vision of affordable housing with integrated green spaces became reality. All she needed to do was sign a memorandum of understanding that would make her the exclusive architectural partner for this transformative project. The MOU was 40 pages of dense legal text, but Henry's team had helpfully highlighted the key sections that described her role, her compensation, and her creative control over the design elements. What they hadn't highlighted, buried in subsection 12.4 of the appendix, was language that allowed for adaptive repurposing of designated land use when market conditions warranted optimization. Callista, exhausted from the emotional toll of recent rejections and betrayals, saw only the opportunity to finally build something meaningful. Carter Sterling Development had gone silent after her presentation, which she interpreted as another polite rejection, pushing her toward this alternative path. She signed the memorandum in Henry's office as rain began falling again outside, the same kind of weather that had accompanied her blind date with Liam just days before. The press release went out within hours, positioning her as the humanitarian face of Donovan Urban Group's bold new direction toward inclusive urban development. Her phone filled with congratulations from colleagues who saw this as her breakthrough moment, unaware that she had just become a shield for something far darker than traditional gentrification. Liam discovered the truth through Oliver Grant's routine review of competitor filings with the city planning department. The documentation Donovan had submitted used Callista's green courtyard designs as the public face of a development proposal, but the supplementary materials told a different story. The affordable housing units would be built in Phase 1 to secure regulatory approval and positive press coverage. Phase 2 would trigger the adaptive repurposing clause, converting the green spaces to premium parking structures. Phase 3 would gradually transition the affordable units to luxury condos through a series of renovations that would price out original residents, while technically maintaining the mixed income designation through creative accounting. The discovery created a crisis of conscience for Liam that went beyond professional competition or personal feelings. He could expose Donovan's deception immediately, but doing so would humiliate Callista publicly and destroy her reputation as someone who had been either complicit or incompetent. He could warn her privately, but their last interaction had made clear she would interpret any contact as further manipulation. The third option was to provide information through indirect channels, allowing her to discover the truth herself and maintain agency in how she responded. He chose the third path, anonymously sending detailed documentation to Sarah Preston and Amanda Wilkins with evidence of Donovan's true intentions. The package included internal emails where Henry had written margin notes, like green space, for photos only, and playground equipment to be removable after inspection. The floodplain analysis showed that Donovan's modifications would redirect water runoff toward low-income neighborhoods, while protecting the luxury towers with elaborate drainage systems that violated environmental justice principles. The information was devastating in its thoroughness, painting a picture of deliberate deception that used Callista's genuine vision as camouflage for extraction of value from vulnerable communities. Sarah and Amanda met Callista at the city's old architectural library, a limestone building that predated the glass towers surrounding it by a century. Between shelves holding blueprints of the city's original democratic planning vision, they spread out the evidence of how her dream was being perverted into its opposite. The altered designs showed her carefully calculated green spaces reduced to decorative strips, the modular housing units redesigned to prevent the adaptability that would let families grow in place, the playground equipment downgraded to meet minimum legal requirements, rather than the safety standards she had specified. Callista read through each document with the growing horror of someone watching their child being reshaped into something unrecognizable. Her signature was on every page, legally binding her to this distortion of everything she believed architecture should accomplish. The memorandum she had signed gave Donovan Urban Group control over implementation, while maintaining her liability for any failures or public backlash. She had become both the face and the fall guy for a scheme that would ultimately displace the very families she had hoped to shelter. The revelation demanded action, but the legal constraints seemed insurmountable until Liam appeared in the library's reading room with a manila envelope containing the one document Callista needed, a signed affidavit from a Donovan Urban Group insider who had preserved records of the original bait-and-switch strategy. This whistleblower had documented how Henry had specifically targeted Callista because her reputation for integrity would provide cover for the project's true intentions. Liam set the envelope on the table without fanfare, said simply that he believed in her vision and her ability to fight for it, then left before she could respond. The planning transformed Callista's apartment into a war room where architecture became ammunition against corporate deception. The team assembled with the precision of a heist crew, each member bringing specific expertise to expose Donovan's scheme at the City Planning Commission's public hearing. Sarah Preston handled the technical analysis, creating visualizations that would demonstrate the flood impact and heat island effects of Donovan's modifications. Amanda Wilkins developed a media strategy that would frame the story as David versus Goliath, rather than allowing Donovan to paint Callista as a disgruntled former partner. George Ellery, a public interest lawyer who had gone to law school with Liam, identified the specific regulations Donovan's plan would violate once its true intentions were revealed. Liam's role was to provide strategic guidance while remaining invisible to preserve Callista's autonomy in the fight. He knew the commission members' concerns and biases, which arguments would resonate with their various constituencies, and most importantly, how Henry Donovan would respond when cornered. Through encrypted messages and unmarked packages, he supplied information about Donovan's previous projects where similar bait-and-switch tactics had been deployed, creating a pattern of behavior that would be impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding. The team worked through 3 consecutive nights, fueled by coffee and determination to prevent another neighborhood from being hollowed out by predatory development. They created a 48-page white paper that documented every deviation from the original green courtyard design, supported by engineering analyses that showed how these changes would impact the community. The augmented reality presentation Sarah developed allowed viewers to see the site transform over time, watching green spaces vanish and affordable units morph into luxury condos through the careful application of loopholes and adaptive repurposing clauses. The City Hall hearing room filled beyond capacity on the day of the presentation, with journalists, housing advocates, environmental groups, and residents of the neighborhoods that would be affected by the development. Henry Donovan had orchestrated his own show of force, bringing investors, political allies, and a public relations team ready to spin any opposition as anti-development extremism. He opened with a polished presentation about Donovan Urban Group's commitment to sustainable urban growth, repeatedly invoking Callista's name and reputation as evidence of the project's integrity. When Henry invited her to stand as the humanitarian face of the project, Callista rose with the calm determination of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Instead of the endorsement Henry expected, she began systematically dismantling the illusion he had constructed. The augmented reality model projected above the hearing room showed the site as Henry claimed it would be. Vibrant green spaces, children playing safely, families gathering in common areas. Then, with a gesture, she transformed it to show what the adaptive repurposing clause would actually create. Parking structures replacing gardens, luxury amenities consuming playground space, floodwaters diverted toward existing low-income housing. The technical specifications she presented weren't accusations but facts, each supported by documentation from Donovan's own filings. The permeability ratios that would fail after the green spaces were paved, the wind tunnel effects created by tower placement that would make street-level spaces uninhabitable, the heat island measurements showing temperature increases that would disproportionately affect elderly residents who couldn't afford air conditioning. She spoke for 20 minutes with the precision of someone performing surgery, excising the cancer of deception from the healthy tissue of legitimate development. Liam's moment came when Henry tried to dismiss the documentation as fabrication, claiming the emails and margin notes were forgeries created by competitors trying to sabotage innovative development. Liam stood from his seat in the back of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention as he introduced himself as the CEO of Carter Sterling Development. He authenticated the leaked documents with technical details only an industry insider would know, then presented the signed affidavit from Donovan's own employee. His testimony lasted less than 5 minutes, but it destroyed any remaining credibility Henry might have salvaged. The commission voted to freeze Donovan's permits pending a comprehensive investigation into fraudulent representation and potential violations of fair housing regulations. The state attorney general's office announced they would examine whether criminal charges were warranted for conspiracy to defraud both investors and the public. News coverage focused on Callista's courage in exposing the scheme, despite personal and professional risk, with several outlets noting that Carter Sterling Development had immediately offered to fund the original green courtyard design with no modifications to her vision. That evening, as the city absorbed the implications of what had been revealed, Callista stood on the harbor pier, where fog was beginning to roll in from the ocean. The same jacket Liam had worn to their blind date appeared beside her, and this time she recognized it for what it had always been. Not a costume or deception, but the authentic choice of someone who valued comfort over impression. They talked through the events that had brought them to this moment, each offering apologies that the other tried to deflect. Callista admitted that her fear of being exploited had made her conflate simplicity with deception, causing her to attack the first person in years who had seen her work as valuable for its social impact rather than its profit potential. Liam acknowledged that his choice to hide his identity, while motivated by a desire for authentic connection, had created an power imbalance that made genuine trust impossible. They had both been trying to protect themselves from the ways their world commodified everything, including human connection. But their defenses had nearly prevented them from recognizing something real when it emerged. The sketchbook he pulled from his jacket was the same one from their first meeting, and inside were drawings he had made weeks before they met, designs for playground equipment that would exceed every safety standard while creating spaces where children's imagination could flourish. He had been adding these elements to her green courtyard design, not to claim credit but to contribute quietly to something he believed in. The collaboration he envisioned wasn't about ownership or control, but about combining their different perspectives to create something neither could achieve alone. Their kiss beside the harbor was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a statement. With the fog wrapping around them like the city itself was offering privacy for this moment of vulnerability, they agreed to move forward as partners, both professionally and personally, with transparency replacing the strategic withholding that characterized so much of their industry. The Green Courtyard project would be built exactly as Callista had envisioned, funded by Carter Sterling Development, but with her complete creative control and both their names on the cornerstone. The construction site 6 months later buzzed with purposeful activity as the Green Courtyard vision became physical reality. Sarah Preston led the sustainable materials team, ensuring every component met environmental standards, while maintaining durability for generations of use. Oliver Grant had restructured the funding model to demonstrate that ethical development could be profitable when measured in community stability rather than quarterly returns. The neighborhood residents who would eventually live there visited regularly, watching their future homes rise from foundations built on transparency rather than deception. Henry Donovan's empire had crumbled under investigation, revealing decades of similar schemes that had displaced thousands of families while enriching investors who never saw the human cost of their returns. The regulatory changes, prompted by the scandal, created new requirements for community input and transparent documentation of any modifications to approved plans. Callista's white paper became required reading in urban planning programs, a case study in how architectural integrity could combat predatory development. The opening ceremony for the Green Courtyard brought together families who had won the lottery for affordable units, their children immediately claiming the playground that exceeded every safety standard while still inviting adventure. The sound of their laughter echoing off buildings designed to human scale rather than maximum density validated every fight, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt that had brought this project to completion. Local news covered the story with the headline, "Designing for Safety, Not Status," a phrase that would become the mission statement for a new generation of architects. That evening, Liam and Callista walked through the lit pathways between buildings where recycled brick created warm textures and climbing vines would eventually create living walls. They had become co-owners of the Beacon and Bean coffee shop, preserving the place where their story began, while ensuring it would remain accessible to the community, rather than being priced out by development. The worn jacket that had marked their first meeting hung in its window beside a photo of the skyline, both artifacts of a conversation about what makes people feel safe in cities that often prioritized profit over humanity. 6 months after opening, the Green Courtyard had become a model for sustainable urban development, with delegations from other cities visiting to understand how affordable housing could include dignity, beauty, and environmental responsibility. The trees planted in the courtyards were growing faster than projected, their roots finding purchase in soil that had been carefully selected to support both plant and human communities. Children played on equipment designed to challenge them safely, while parents gathered in common areas that encouraged interaction rather than isolation. The transformation wasn't just physical but philosophical, proving that development could enhance rather than extract value from communities. Other developers began incorporating elements of the Green Courtyard model, discovering that residents would pay reasonable premiums to live in spaces that prioritized well-being over square footage maximization. The waiting list for units grew not because of artificial scarcity, but because word spread that this was a place where architecture served life rather than the other way around. On a foggy morning, exactly 1 year after their first blind date, Liam and Callista sat in the Beacon and Bean, their coffee cooling as they reviewed plans for the next project, a senior housing complex that would integrate with the Green Courtyard to create intergenerational community. The sketchbook between them was new but already filling with ideas that challenged conventional assumptions about aging in place, mobility, and social connection. Their collaboration had evolved beyond romance or business partnership into something rarer. Shared purpose manifest in concrete and gardens. The city beyond the coffee shop window was changing slowly but perceptibly, with pocket parks appearing where parking lots had been, with buildings stepping back to allow sunlight to reach sidewalks, with developers beginning to ask not just what was legal, but what was beneficial. Callista's question from that first night about which skyline made people feel safe had become a guiding principle for a movement that measured success in children's laughter, in elderly residents able to age with dignity, in families who could afford to stay in neighborhoods as they improved rather than being displaced by that very improvement. Liam raised his coffee cup in a small toast to the anniversary they were both pretending not to mark, and Callista touched her cup to his with a smile that acknowledged everything they had built and everything still to come. Outside, the city hummed with the complex rhythm of millions of lives intersecting, each seeking safety, meaning, and connection in the spaces between buildings. The Green Courtyard stood as proof that those spaces could be designed with intention, funded with integrity, and protected with vigilance against those who would exploit rather than nurture human need. The worn jacket still hung in the beacon and bean, no longer a symbol of deception or poverty, but of the choice to be valued for contribution rather than consumption. Next to it, the photo of the skyline had been joined by others. The first family moving into green courtyard, children playing on the innovative playground equipment, gardens in full bloom with residents harvesting vegetables for a community dinner. Each image captured a moment when architecture served its highest purpose, creating spaces where human lives could unfold with dignity, safety, and joy. The story that began with suspicion about a blind date with a seemingly poor stranger had evolved into something neither Callista nor Liam could have imagined in those first awkward moments of evaluation and defense. They had discovered that owning half a city meant nothing compared to earning the trust of its residents. That true wealth lay not in controlling skylines, but in creating horizons where others could envision their futures. The city they were helping to build wouldn't belong to those with the most capital, but to those who understood that the deepest foundation for any structure was the community it served. Their legacy wouldn't be measured in square footage or profit margins, but in the generations who would grow up taking for granted that cities could prioritize humanity over returns, that affordable could also mean beautiful, that development could repair rather than rupture the social fabric. The green courtyard stood as the first paragraph in a story still being written. Each new project adding sentences to a narrative about cities designed by and for the people who brought them to life with their daily choices, struggles, and celebrations. The morning sun broke through the fog, illuminating the coffee shop, where two people had taken the risk of seeing past surfaces to find something essential. In the distance, construction cranes marked sites where new chapters of the same story would unfold, where other architects and developers inspired by the green courtyard model would test whether ethical development could scale beyond individual projects to transform entire cities. The answer remained unwritten, held in the space between vision and reality, where all meaningful change begins. Waiting for those brave enough to close the gap with action, rather than just intention.